All right, here we go. As mentioned, I am an author, and my latest book is titled Shattering Black Male Stereotypes, Eradicating the 10 Most Destructive Media-Generated Illusions About Black Men. So I couldn't be more proud than to be able to speak to you men today. And again, I am a life coach, motivational speaker, radio and TV show host who's committed his life to empowering men to live extraordinary lives. So I want to begin with a question. And although this is possibly one of the most important questions a person can ask, very few people will actually ask it. So I pose the question to you. Is it possible for you to live an extraordinary life?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, before we answer that question, though, we must first define what is extraordinary. What does it mean for a life to be extraordinary? So, if I were to ask you what an extraordinary life would look like, what would your version of an extraordinary life look like? What would you have? What would you be doing? How would you feel? What would make your life extraordinary?
One of the things would probably be making sure that both my family and my community is better after I leave. So,
Okay.
Leaving a legacy and leaving something for others to build on top of.
Perfect. You, what would your extraordinary version of life look like? Yeah, absolutely.
I would just say peace and happiness and fulfillment in the simplest to the largest things that I do.
Fantastic. So there's not one version of extraordinary. Everyone's going to have a different version of what extraordinary looks like. But here's what I know with absolute certainty. An extraordinary life consists of 5 components, what I call 5 keys. Key number 1 is knowledge of self. Key number 2 is inner peace. Key number 3 is dynamic health. Key number 4 are great relationships. And key number 5 is financial abundance, which simply means that you have enough money that you're not stressing out over it. Those are the 5 keys to living an extraordinary life. And if you're missing any one of those keys, I can assure you that your life is not fully extraordinary. So I come back to the question, is it possible for you to live an extraordinary life? Can you have knowledge of self, inner peace, dynamic health, great relationships, and financial abundance? And I'll say the answer is absolutely yes. And why do I say that? Because I'm currently living my version of an extraordinary life. And this is Michael Taylor's version of an extraordinary life. Because I get to do what I absolutely love doing. My life is filled with passion and purpose and meaning. I've been blissfully married for the past 16 years to the woman of my dreams. I have 3 grown children who are the light of my life. I get to write books and speak to people and coach people on living extraordinary lives. So for me, my life is extraordinary. And so I know that if I can do it, you can do it also. But I got to tell you, it hadn't always been extraordinary. So I got to give you a little backstory. You see, I was born in the inner city projects of Corpus Christi, Texas, to a single mom with 6 kids. And we were basically the poster children for poverty back in the 60s. Government housing, government assistance, we were extremely poor. But although financially we may have been poor, we had what's most important, which was a mother who instilled in me that anything was possible. And so when I was in the 11th grade, I decided that I was going to drop out of high school because I convinced myself that I could get rich selling vacuum cleaners. Very poor decision, a bad choice. I failed miserably. Never sold a single vacuum cleaner. Fortunately for me, I secured a job with a building supply center. And I worked extremely hard. I climbed the corporate ladder. And in a very short period of time, I became the youngest manager in the history of that company. And so there I am. I'm 23 years old. I'm living the American dream. I got the house, the wife, the 2.5 kids, the 401ks, the vacations. And by society standards, I was pretty successful, right? And then within approximately a 6-year time frame, the American dream turned into the American nightmare as I went through a divorce, a bankruptcy, a foreclosure, a deep, deep state of depression. I was homeless for 2 years living out of a car. So I know a thing or two about adversity. And so during that time, I somehow knew that I was destined to live an extraordinary life. But my life definitely didn't reflect it at the time. And so I needed to figure out how to get my life back on track. And then I received a miracle. Anybody here believe in miracles? You see, Albert Einstein once said that there are 2 ways to look at life. One is as if nothing is a miracle, and the other is as if everything is a miracle. I choose the latter. I believe life is a miracle. Everything is a miracle if we have the awareness to see it as such. And so I actually received a specific miracle, and this is what actually got my life back on track. I was sitting up late one night because I was too depressed to sleep. And I was sitting at the edge of my bed, and I'm looking across the room at my bookshelf, and I noticed that all the books on my bookshelf had something to do with making money and getting rich. And as I looked at those books, this question just popped in my head. And the question was this: Michael, what if you took all the energy and effort you've used in trying to get rich and simply figure out how to be happy? Now, as simplistic as that question sounds, it literally changed my life in an instant. Something in me shifted. I can't explain it, but something moved in me, and I knew I'm going to get out of this. And so I'm sitting there thinking about that question, because I had everything society said I was supposed to have to be happy, but I was absolutely miserable, and I wanted to just get that feeling back. So how many of you remember when you were a kid and you felt happy? You would just laugh and giggle and have fun. How many of you remember that? Remember that? Why do we lose that as adults? Because we're conditioned to believe that there are things outside of us that will make us happy. When we're kids, we're just happy to be kids. We don't have mortgages and stress to worry about, right? So I committed that I was going to figure out how to be happy again. Didn't care if I got rich. I just wanted to be happy. I want to have that experience again. And so there I am sitting there trying to figure this out. And as a result of asking myself that question, all of a sudden it just hit me. There's nothing more important than being happy. So you got to figure that out. You got to figure out how to be happy. And once again, as a result of asking that question, I stopped reading books on getting rich and being wealthy. And so I started reading books on philosophy and psychology and spirituality and metaphysics and personal development. And I went on this deep, what I'll call journey of transformation. And amazingly, I started reading all these books, and I was reading literally hundreds of them, literally hundreds of books. And so after a couple of years, I started putting my life back together slowly but surely. Things started to come together. And I was sitting up one night, and I recognized that something was still missing. And I couldn't figure out what it was. But I wasn't experiencing that happiness that I knew was available to me. And so as I'm sitting there thinking about this, I thought, I got all this information, all this knowledge, but why isn't my life changing? And then I read a book by a guy named John Bradshaw. And in John Bradshaw's book, he said that the key to healing is creating what he calls an interpersonal bridge with another human being. And what I recognized was I had spent the last several years reading all these books, but I had completely isolated myself from people. I wasn't dating, I wasn't socializing, I was just reading all these books, trying to figure out how to get happy in my head. Well, in his book, he talked about the importance of being with another human being and sharing yourself openly and honestly. And he said that was the only way that you would truly heal and be transformed. And so he recommended that one way to do that was to be willing to go to therapy. Now, in our culture, there's this negative stigma about men asking for help. As a matter of fact, I will say that the 3 most difficult words for any man to say is, I need help. And so I want to change that conversation right now. I want to remove that stigma right now. And I want you to recognize that there is no shame and no weakness in saying, I need help. You see, it is our unwillingness to say that leads to addictions, suicide. We've seen all the stories about suicide. All that's related to a person's inability or unwillingness to simply say, I need help. So I want to invite you today, right now, to think about it, because we all have stuff. We can sit up here and look good in our suits and drive up in our nice cars, but we have stuff. It's human nature. We all have stuff. So if you're currently dealing with some stuff and you know what that stuff is, I'm giving you permission right now to know that it's okay to say, I need help. Don't be afraid to reach out to someone and say, hey, look, I just need some help. Even if it's just listening, sometimes just listening to someone can change their lives. And so again, we want to change that stereotype that men don't seek support and don't seek help. See, for the last 6 years, I've been writing about redefining masculinity in society, because I believe that's the answer to the majority of problems we have in this world. Because men are trapped in what I'll call antiquated paradigms of what it means to be a man. And so it's our responsibility now to shift that conversation and to understand that there's no shame in simply saying, and I need help, and know that we don't have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. You see, when I was going through my divorce and all of that, I didn't have anybody to talk to, and I was spiraling out of control. Fortunately for me, I read that book, and I decided to gain the courage to go to therapy. And so back to my story. I decided I'm going to go to therapy because I was committed to being happy. No matter what it took, I was going to do that. I was going to get there. So I go to therapy, and probably the most difficult thing I've ever done, just deciding that I'm going to go and speak to someone about all the stuff that was going on inside of me. So I get with this therapist, and again, I do believe in miracles because this lady was an absolute angel. And I'll never forget, I walked into the therapist's office, and I was so afraid. I was literally sweating bullets, and I'm walking around the office, and I'm looking at her brochures and everything, and her secretary asked if I needed some help. And I said, nah, I'm just doing a little research on depression. Well, she picked up on how scared I was. She went and got the therapist. The therapist walked up. She says, hi, can I help you? And I said, no, I'm just kind of looking for some information about depression. She says, well, have you been depressed? And I go, I don't know. I'm not sure. That's why I need to do some research. And she says, do you mind coming in? We can talk. And I said, yeah. So I walk into her office, and we began the process of healing. And through this conversation with this therapist, I came to understand how some traumatic events of my childhood was still impacting my life as an adult. And through this process, I began healing from some of that. And so after several sessions, I had some breakthroughs, as they would say in the community. I had some real breakthroughs about how that trauma was impacting my life. And I started to open up and to begin the process of self-love. See, that's something that we as men, we don't talk about, self-love. But that's the key to living an extraordinary life. That is the foundation of knowledge of self. Well, through this process, again, I was healing, and this lady was just amazing. And then she recommended that I do group therapy. She says, You've had your breakthroughs with me individually. You're really going to grow if you go to a group. Well, see, I wasn't feeling that. I was still too scared to be that vulnerable in a group of people. I wasn't willing to do it. So I said, nah, I'll pass. And I left therapy. The good news is I continued my growth. I kept reading books and I started going to seminars. And seminars started opening up more doors for me. And then I read another book by John Bradshaw. And in the book, John Bradshaw said that the key to truly being happy is what he called healing your inner child. Anybody heard that term, healing your inner child? Raise your hand if you've ever heard that. Okay? So he talked about healing your inner child. And so in the book, he talked about how it was possible for us as human beings to go back to that time when we experienced that trauma and we could actually heal it and let it go. And so he was offering a 3-day workshop calling Healing the Inner Child. And I knew I had to go. So I go to this workshop and, whew, boy, I got to tell you. I want you to imagine this. Try to imagine the worst childhood a child could have. Now I want you to multiply that by 10. That was my childhood. Every imaginable type of abuse a child could experience, I went through. And so I had a lot of scars. I had a lot of emotional trauma trapped inside of me that I needed to deal with. And I gained the courage to do that in John Bradshaw's workshop. And so through this process, what I learned was that pain that I experienced as a kid, that I hadn't processed yet, it was affecting all areas of my life. It was why my relationships weren't working. It was why I was always trying to meet other people's approval. And it was literally driving my life. And in essence, it was all because of shame. I had this deep sense of shame that I, as a human being, was somehow defective. And so through John Bradshaw's work, I was able to heal those scars, heal those wounds, and get to a place where I can honestly say that I'm happy and at peace with myself. And so as a result of literally years of reading and workshops and seminars and therapy, what I can say to you right now, in this very moment, I am happier now than I've ever been in my life. Was it easy? No. The most difficult thing I've ever done. But the end result is I accomplished what I set out to accomplish, which is to simply be happy. And so now, from a place of that happiness, without that shame attached to it, I can do all the things that I've always dreamed I could do. But the truth is now I'm free. I'm not driven by negative emotions and trying to get people's approval and trying to get people to like me. I do things out of passion in my heart. And so if I can overcome all of those challenges in my life, I'm absolutely certain that you can overcome any challenge that you might have in your life. But you got to be willing to do the work. And here's something that I want you to remember. If you don't go within, you will always go without. Now, the Master taught us that seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and all things will be given unto you. We've heard that, right? And where did he say the kingdom was? He said the kingdom of heaven is within you. And so my interpretation of that is that I have to be willing to do my inner work, heal those wounds and scars in order to enter the kingdom. And I feel blessed to say that I've now entered that kingdom. And once again, if I can do it, so can you. So that is how I got to this particular point in my life now where I'm coaching and inspiring others by sharing my story and by sharing some information that supports and empowers others to begin their own journey of transformation. You see, because I used to be successful on the outside. But on the inside, I was broken. And so if you're building a business and you're trying to figure out what might be missing, rather than look outside for the next marketing technique or the next networking event to go to, ask yourself some deeper questions. And the first question I would want you to ask is, am I really happy with myself? That's a question that most of us won't ask. But I can assure you, no matter how much success you gain, if you don't connect to your soul and your heart, you'll never be fulfilled. And your life will never be extraordinary. You know, I'm looking across the room here and I'm looking at the picture of Prince, who I absolutely love. Just an amazing guy, right? Had everything. But yet I will assert that one of the things that led to his demise was his unwillingness to simply say, I need help. So it's not about the money. It's not about how big you grow your business. It's about, have you done the work to heal your heart so that you can live an extraordinary life? So once again, it's important for us, especially as men of color, more so, to be courageous enough to start this process. Because over the last 20, 25 years that I've been doing this work and doing this research, I was always the only man of color in the room. But what I have come to know is there's a reason for that. Because the source, as I understand it, you may use the word God, I simply refer to it as the source. The source recognized that I needed to go through this process so that I could teach men who look like me to change their lives. And therefore, as a result of all that work and as a result of connecting to my passions, I found my purpose. And my purpose is doing exactly what I'm doing right now. So that's a little backstory of how I got here, but I wanted to kind of touch bases on the 5 keys. Let's talk a little bit about the 5 keys. How much time we have? My watch I didn't set. What time we got? What time we got? 12:34. Okay, good. 12:38. We're good. All right. So let's talk about those 5 keys real quick. Number 1, knowledge of self. Now, if you ask most people, who are you? People will say things like, well, my name is Michael. I'm an author. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a husband. I'm a Republican. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Christian. I'm a Muslim. We have all these titles and labels, right, to try to define who we are. Well, I'm going to say that that's not who you are. It's just a label. Who you are is much, much deeper than that. And knowledge of self is a process of going within for you to discover who that is. And so when I think about understanding myself, I spent so many years doing the motivational stuff. You know, I used to do the Anthony Robbins stuff, walking on hot coals barefooted and all that. And I was always motivated. And like I said, I made money. I started my first company when I was 13. But it wasn't until I did that inner work and started healing what was going on inside of me that I actually got free. So when we start talking about knowledge of self, it's about moving away from what society says we're supposed to do and beginning the process of inner growth and inner transformation. And knowledge of self means we learn how to connect with our emotions. Because herein lies our greatest challenge as men. Because I wrote a book called The New Conversation with Men. And in the book, I talk about the 5 illusions of manhood. And the first illusion is that as men, we're supposed to be non-emotional and disconnected. We're taught that feelings are for women. Men aren't supposed to feel. We're not supposed to be emotional. But here's the problem. You cannot be relational without being emotional. And the reason some of us struggle with relationships is because we don't know how to be emotional. Because society says we're not supposed to be. You see, after my divorce, I got to tell you, I struggled with relationships. And all of my relationships were ending the same way. Women were saying, I care too much about you to stay in this relationship. How much sense does that make? Well, see, what they would also say is, I can't stand this relationship because you're emotionally unavailable. I had no idea what the heck that meant. What do you mean? I'm a nice guy. I don't cheat. I bring home the bacon. What do you mean, emotionally unavailable? Well, again, I had some stuff that I had to look at and figure out what it was about me that was causing me to not be able to connect. Because in our culture, society says that as men, we have 3 responsibilities: procreate, provide, and protect. But guess what? They forgot to teach us how to connect. And believe it or not, that's what we long for. That's what we want more than anything. We want to connect. We want to feel loved. We want to feel appreciated. Most of us don't know how to do that. And so that is part of the process of knowledge of self, getting in touch with yourself, who you are as a human being. And this has absolutely nothing to do with your ethnicity, because emotions are just energy in motion. Feelings are the language of your soul. It's how your soul communicates with you. And if you're disconnected from that, then you're going to be missing out on some positive information, because I believe that information is coming from your source. So how many of you have ever heard the term a woman's intuition? Men are just as intuitive as women. I guarantee you. It's just we've been conditioned not to be because we're taught not to feel. Intuition is about feeling. It's an inner knowing in our soul that something is right. And yet we disconnect from that. So the key is to make a commitment to yourself that you're going to invest in yourself. Not with stuff, but with information and awareness that can change you from the inside out. That's key number 1. Key number 2 is inner peace. When I was going through this process, I remember writing in my journal one day or one night. I wrote, I wish I could turn my mind off. Because I'd have all these thoughts and I'd be thinking so hard, my head would hurt. And I couldn't stop that incessant thinking. And I just wanted to stop it. I just wanted to turn my brain off, and I couldn't. And so what I learned through this process is, as a result of more than 20, 25 years of a meditation practice, I learned how to quiet my mind. Now, some people think when you think meditation, it's a process of making your mind go completely blank. No, meditation is simply the process of being aware of what you're thinking. Because most of us are on autopilot. We don't even know what we're thinking. These thoughts are just running through our heads and we don't know what's going on, and we're just kind of in a reactive state. But when we learn to quiet the mind and pay attention to the inner nudgings and our intuition, then we experience inner peace. Now, there are more than 2,000 religions in the world. Every one of them has within them 2 things: prayer and meditation. So regardless of what religion you may adhere to, I assure you that meditation is actually a part of it. And so if you want to experience inner peace, I know of no better way than learning how to just quiet your mind through the process of meditation. And so, do we have any incessant worriers here? People that are always worried, oh man, I gotta do this tomorrow, I gotta do this. That used to be me. My mind always worrying about stuff that hadn't even happened yet. Well, see, that's not inner peace. That's the opposite of inner peace. When we get to that place of inner peace, we let go of the need to worry, because we understand that we have everything we need in us to deal with whatever shows up. Because stuff's going to show up. That's just life. So having inner peace is extremely important. Number 3, dynamic health. As men of color, it is our responsibility to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves physically. That means not abusing any illegal substances. That means not overeating. That means knowing our ideal weight. That means understanding blood pressure, cholesterol level, heart rate, those basic things, and being willing to go to the doctor to get a checkup. It's amazing how many men we lose because they're afraid to go to a doctor to get checked out. That's unacceptable to me. We got to have a conversation about taking care of our physical health. And again, if you want your life to be extraordinary, health is wealth. So we got to be healthy. And number 4, great relationships. Now, we don't do this intentionally, but the truth is, most of us neglect our relationships. Again, we don't do it intentionally, but what we believe is that I get into a relationship with this person. My job is to provide and protect. And that's what we're doing, right? We're trying to bring home the money. We're trying to take care of the family. We're trying to do all that. But we don't have the tools that allow us to really create intimacy and connection in our relationships. And the only way to create great relationships is to have the emotional tools of intimacy and vulnerability. Meaning you're able to openly express how you feel. Before I began this process, that was foreign language to me. A woman would start talking about emotions and I would shut down and shut off, and I just couldn't relate because I was disconnected from my own heart. But the key, once again, is for us to be willing to do that emotional work, heal those parts of ourselves that are keeping us from connecting. Relationships are the glue that hold our lives together. And it's imperative for us to create bonds that are loving, nurturing. You know, I got to tell you, a lot of times as men, we get together and we have this idea that when a man truly loves this woman, we call him whooped. For me, there is nothing that compares to knowing that my wife loves and adores me just for me. I love being married. Absolutely love being married. But I took the time to find the right person, and I got it right this time. See, the first time I did it, I was completely unconscious. I got married for all the wrong reasons. But this time I got it right. And again, nothing compares to having that person in your life who's got your back. What do they call them these days? Ride or die chicks? I got a ride or die chick. Just love her to death. So, great relationships. You got to have great relationships. And last but not least is financial abundance. And as I mentioned, financial abundance simply means that you have enough money that you're not stressing out over it. So we got to make sure that we're doing some of the basic things. Maintaining our credit. Spending less than we make. I used to be the type of person that was keeping up with the Joneses. My neighbor gets a new car. Yeah, I think I might want to get a new car. So we do all these things to compete against each other. And then we wonder why we're not happy, because we've overextended ourselves to the point of being financially strapped. So Ellis and I had a quick little conversation a minute ago. Ellis, where are you at? There he is. And we were talking about, so what does it take for us, especially as men of color, to move past just these 1 or 2 person companies and grow into, I'll say, what I'm dreaming of is billion-dollar enterprises. Because that's one of my goals. That's one of my dreams. That's what I'm committed to, building a billion-dollar company. And I have all the pieces in place to make that happen. I'm absolutely confident of that. But my point here is that as men of color, how many of us are having conversations about becoming billionaires? See, a lot of us, we talk about, yeah, I'm going to be a millionaire. Well, that's kind of easy these days, actually. But we have to expand our mindset to think outside of the black box and recognize that a business is a business. Don't be attached to this label called, I run a black-owned business. We got to let that conversation go. Dream big. The doors are wide open for any of us who are willing to put forth the effort And it begins with the programs like this. Because you have to surround yourself with people that are willing to think like you do. And if you aren't willing to think that big, then you wouldn't be here anyway. So my invitation to you men today, as I close, is to ask yourself, first of all, am I truly happy with my life? And believe it or not, that's a difficult question to answer. Because when I was married, if you would have asked me if I was happy, I would have said, yeah, man, yeah. See, my wife, my kids, my house. Truth was, I was miserable. So, first of all, we got to be willing to do the work, knowledge of self. We got to gain that sense of inner peace, and I believe that comes from, number one, recognizing that you are connected to something larger than yourself. You can call that whatever you choose to call that. You can use whatever path you use to get there. But acknowledging that you're connected to something greater than yourself opens your mind to infinite possibilities. Because I will assert that if you're willing to dream that big, it's the source in you that's giving you the idea to do it. Anybody here heard of a guy named Deepak Chopra? Anybody know Deepak Chopra? I'm a huge fan of Deepak Chopra, and Deepak Chopra said this: inherent in every intention and desire are the mechanics for its fulfillment. In other words, you wouldn't even have the idea if Source didn't want you to create it. So simply recognizing and connecting to that source gives you the belief and the awareness and the faith that you can pull it off. But it all begins with the belief. So, in summary, that's the key to living an extraordinary life. And if you're here, if you're listening to this, I know with absolute certainty it's possible for you. Do you think it's an accident that you showed up here today? I don't believe in accidents. I think there's a reason you're listening to this right now. There's a message in here for you, someone. My hope, or actually my wish, is that someone here today who was like I was 20 years ago, who was pretending to be happy. But someone here today recognizes that it's okay for them to ask for help. And they take a moment and they do just that. They ask for help. If you don't get anything out of this talk today, I hope that's the one thing you get. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Know that it's absolutely possible for you to live an extraordinary life. So I want to close with the question: is it possible for you to live an extraordinary life? What's your answer? Yes. Absolutely. God bless you.